Hello and welcome to another edition of History Science Fiber. This week I'm going to be showing you how to use some very basic Shibori techniques to variegate your yarn. But this time, instead of a plain, we're going to be using a marl. Let's get started. Why would you want to use a marl? Marls are yarn that have been plied together different colors. In this case, this is a natural yarn. So these are both two different natural colors of wool that have been plied together. In the shop, I often find they look a little bit plain. It has quite sort of a regular candy cane-esque vibe to it. But once we get it variegated, it's incredibly beautiful the way that the marl adds to sort of the speckling or a marbling effect. And it's great for scrunchy hats, for beanies, for toques, and also great for socks. You'll see a lot of the sock wool that looks so great in the stores is actually marls that have been variegated, kind of exactly what we're gonna do today. So we're seeing more and more marls. I think it's worth giving it a shot. So the first step in any dyeing is going to be scouring. Scouring is the act of soaking your yarn, here's our two marls, in a vat of water with some mild soap. Now, woolite works really well. What I have here is called Orvis paste. It's another good one. It says a tablespoon per kilo of fiber. I have about half a kilo, so we're gonna use half a tablespoon. And we're just gonna add the water now. I should say the water should be room temperature. It's really important that we don't shock the wool. Changing the temperature of the wool quickly can lead to some issues in terms of losing the luster and it felting. So that's about good right now. And then while that's going, I'll get the soap dissolving as well. Now it gets heated slowly on the stove for about 1 hour at a simmer, and you stir very, very gently about every 10 minutes or so. All right, now it has cooled down, and we're gonna pick up our yarn, and you can see just how much dirt, vegetable matter, and other stuff has come out. Now it's time to measure out our mordant. So this is the metal salt that we are going to use to get the color to adhere to the fiber. It's an extra step you don't have to do in acid or modern dyes, but you need to do it for natural dyeing with most stuff. Some stuff you don't, like if you're dyeing with indigo or lichens, you don't. And we're gonna do proportion of the weight. So here's our alum. We're gonna measure 16% of the dry weight of our fiber. I happen to know there's 500 grams of fiber because each of those skeins was 250 grams, and 16% of 500 is 80 grams. So we're gonna measure out 80 grams right now. And you'll find with alum, it's a little bit resistant to dissolving in water. So normally what you're gonna do is put it into a jar with warm water. That's fine, 83 is fine. Now that we've got our, I've already got a jar here with some nice hot water, and we're gonna put it in. Now you'll see it doesn't really dissolve very quickly, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna stir it in here until it's all dissolved. Then I'm gonna pour this into the water in the vessel, and then the yarn goes in. You don't wanna ever add this at the same time as your fiber is in the pot. You can get uneven results. So now I just stir this up. Wait for it to go clear. Now we're gonna add, the wool is still slightly warm, so we're gonna add basically the same. Here's our dissolved alum. We're gonna add the yarn back in. I'm gonna heat it on the stove at a simmer, about 80 degrees Celsius, for 1 hour. And then I'm going to let that cool, and then the yarn will be all ready to dye. It's still kind of wet. And it's the same temperature. I usually fill this pot about 2/3 full, which allows enough room for that yarn to move around. So we're just gonna heat it up slowly until it's at a simmer. Now with alum, when you're mordanting with any metal, you wanna turn your fan on your stove so that the if there's any kind of chemical, any of the metals are coming up in the steam, it's going to get vented out. It's now been heated for the hour and cooled, and I'm going to remove it and give it a rinse and let it cool, or let it dry, I mean. All right, here is our loop. We have washed it, scoured it, we have mordanted it, and now we're gonna dye it. So we could just put the whole thing in the pot and get one color, but for this, I wanna try out very standard Shibori technique. Put part of it into a plastic bag. Now these bags, I have to be honest, I picked them up in the bulk section of my local grocery store. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it into the pot with part of it covered up in a bag, tied off, so it doesn't dye. Now, I could do that in the middle, get half of it covered, and then I could do one color, switch it and cover this side, and then do another color, and we'd get 2 colors. But if we shift offset by 1/3, we're actually at 3 colors. So what I'm gonna do here is tie it into 1/3. So the first technique I wanted to demonstrate is using zip ties. So the first step is to take a zip tie that's long enough to tighten around. Here I think I used 2 6-inch zip ties together. And then you want to get it quite basically as tightly as you can, making what will become a seal in a second. So once you've tied it as tightly as it can go, you're gonna snip off the end. And so what that does is create really, really dense collection of fibers together that the water is not going to be able to get through or penetrate. The second step is to put it into the bag. Now, I would prefer to have less use of plastic, but I haven't figured out a system that excludes water like a good old plastic bag. I do though reuse this bag for the second step, and that's what you can do if the bag is just a little bit tough enough to stand the heat of a simmer. So the second step is to put the fiber that you don't want dyed into the bag, and you're going to zip tie again, this time at the same point, and that's going to allow the bag to basically make a seal.
And then the last step in the process is to fold back the plastic rim of the bag that's basically you want to fold it back onto itself and then tie it back. And so here I just use a little bit of wool, just trying to really minimize the amount of plastic that I'm using. When I demonstrate with the second color, we're actually going to use cotton twine instead of zip ties. So you could use either, basically using the same techniques. So it sort of depends on what you have on hand. For this one, what I'm doing is I'm tying it back so that when this goes into the dye pot, that edge of the bag, the top of the bag, is not interfering with the fibers. And you should end up with a nice clear transition from the dye when we put it back in the pot, and the part that's in the bag is going to stay clear. So basically at the end, there's almost 3 layers that's being tied. The first layer is gathering the fiber, the second gathers the bag, and then the third folds back that top lip of the bag back onto itself. And here we are, ready for our first dye. And then just leave the fiber to soak. So for your first color, you want to use the palest one first, and I really wanted to do a yellow. So a great natural dye that's available in many, many stores is onion skins. So what I tend to do is I will go through, I will collect all of the loose skin, and then I will add a couple of onions into the bag. It's a really inexpensive way to get a great big bag of dye. And if you do that kind of every time you're going to the grocery store, you end up with a lot of onions. This is my son giving me a hand. And then you just bring them home and you chop them all up. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth or detail here because I do have a video on dyeing with onion skins, but just like any other dye, you're just going to simmer that for an hour. I tend to use one of these paint bags from the paint store that helps just filter it out. As you can see, you can just yank the bag out. If you don't have a bag, you can just use it as is and then just pick the skins out when the fiber dries. So here we've soaked our fiber for at least 20 minutes, and then I just wring it out, and then I put it into the dye. So when you're doing this, you're trying to try to make sure that the water that you've been soaking it in and the water you're transitioning to is the same temperature, and that helps resist felting. Now this dye was a really, really concentrated onion skin dye, and I ended up really only simmering it for about 5 minutes. If you leave fiber into onion skins for too long, that color will darken and darken and darken into a deep brown, and I didn't want a deep brown. So as you can see, I got the yellow just after 5 minutes, and even though it's so hot, and normally you should let it cool, I yanked it out because I just didn't want to lose that yellow. I really wanted to keep it. I thought it was such a beautiful, bright, golden yellow. So then I took it out. Again, it was hotter than I would have liked, but that was the risk I took. I took it over to the sink and then I rinsed it in as hot as the sink water could get. And this time I really want to make sure that I'm rinsing out all the water, all the dye until it's nice and clear. And then I hung it up to dry.
All right, now it's time for us to think about the other color we want to use now that we have our yellow. I was thinking purple might be great. I was also thinking of blue because then you get blue, green, and yellow, but I don't really feel like setting up an indigo vat. So we're gonna go with alkanet. Alkanet is a root found around the Mediterranean, and it will give us purple. It's moderately light fast, so it's not perfect, but I think it'll give us some good results. You want to dye at 75 to 100% weight of fiber or woof, which are skeins 250. So somewhere in the range of 140 to 160 grams. So we haven't worked with alkanet on my channel before. I've got it in my blog. What's unique about it is that it's only soluble in an alcohol. So we've got some rum here we're going to use. So first of all, let's weigh it out. Let's tear that. And so I'm aiming for about 140 to 160, 170. That should be good. So that's getting close to 100%, which is good. The next step is going to be to take this and put it into this jar. We're gonna put it in, and then we're gonna add our alcohol shake, and we'll leave it for 2 days. Funnel here. Okay, now time for our alcohol. Give it a shake. As you can see, it goes quite a dark color. I'm going to continue to shake it for a couple minutes just to make sure we're getting sort of maximum infusion of liquid into the clumps, breaking them up. And then we're gonna let it sit for 2 days.
So after 2 days, the alkanet was ready to go and the fiber had dried. So now we are going to cut out that wool tie. We're going to take out our 2 levels of zip ties. And I checked that the bag still held air. You could still make a seal, so there wasn't any holes in it. So I wanted to reuse this bag. But I had a look here, and I was really happy that the water, the dye hadn't been taken into the fiber that was covered up by the bag. So it did work quite well. So here, I did the same thing as before. So I took a third of it for the second level. Having done this, I kind of wish I had kept a bit more of the yellow because it was such a lovely color. But that's what I went with, a third. But yeah, if I had to do it again, I would have kept a little bit more of the yellow. So it's basically a similar system if you want to use cotton twine. So this is just cotton twine that you'd have in your kitchen for trussing up other kinds of dishes and recipes. You want to take a length here. So instead of using the zip tie, you are going to wrap that yarn, the cotton twill, the cotton yarn, around a few times nice and tight and tie it with a knot. I actually preferred this to the zip tie, and I would go with this one again. I just found it gave me such a crisp, clear delineation at the end that I would definitely do this one again. And so that would be my recommendation if you have cotton twine, just to use that. I think I ended up wrapping it about 6 times and then just doing a double knot. And then just really sort of tying it as tightly as I could. And then the same system as before, which is to tie it. And then I trim the ends, and then I'm going to insert it back into the bag. Yeah, and I think that this was a really, really easy way to do this this system, and I'm super excited to explore it a bit more. So this is the same bag as before, as I mentioned. I get the feeling that you could use one bag quite a number of times. I think eventually the plastic will get more brittle because of the heat that's applied, so eventually it will crack and break, but there was definitely more life in this plastic bag. I really do try not to use plastic, but I just can't imagine a sustainable bag that has the same water quality. Maybe a nylon bag I could look into or something like that, but this is what I had available. So once that was tied off again, it's still in the same spot. As you can see, there's I didn't want to leave this top edge of the bag. So just like last time, I folded it back on itself, and I did a better job of keeping the air out of the bag, and that just sort of made it a little bit easier to handle in the dye pot. But I was excited, like I said, to pair this yellow with the purple. I do think that there was a little bit too much yellow out of the bag because that center part just become brown, which is what happens when you add yellow and purple together. But the process, I think, worked really well. So here again, you're just soaking it getting ready for the dye pot, just as usual, using room temperature water, giving it a few squeezes, and then you just leave it for about 20 minutes, and that just makes the dyeing process so much easier. So at this stage, you treat the alkanet just like you would any other dye. The only difference has been the addition of alcohol to make the dye pigment soluble. So you are going to add it straight into your water, give it a stir. Now, a couple things about dyeing with alkanet. One thing I find is that it looks really muddy. It has sort of the feel that you've just added mud. And you're like, how is this going to give me purple? I don't know, but it does. And if you increase the pH, you can actually get into like really deep cold purples, which is nice. So just like other dyes, I simmered it for an hour on its own. I let it cool, and now it was ready to go. So what I'm hoping for is purple where the yarn was white, and then probably it's going to go a brown where you're overlapping purple with yellow, which is just basic color theory. So the only difference also I should mention with alkanet is it cannot go above 60 degrees Celsius. That will denature the dye pigment. So you really want to make sure that you watch it closely. And then you can leave it sort of as long, it'll get darker the longer you leave it. I was happy with it after an hour, but some people will also leave it overnight. I thought I got a really deep purple as it was, so I was totally fine with that. And then now, as usual, you're just going to give it a rinse you're just going to give it a rinse until it runs clear. And then you're done. I was so excited. So here we go. Beautiful golden yellow into that brown, into that purple. So I do wish I had made the brown section a little bit shorter and the purple and yellow longer. So I would definitely recommend that if you use this process. At this stage, I let it dry. I put it on my Swift and I wound it into the ball with my trusty helper, my daughter. My daughter Maya. So there we go. We balled it up. And now we're ready to knit. I've decided to go for a beanie, but I loved the bright golden yellow with the purple. I was so happy with it, and I would definitely do this again.